Your hosts are Jared and Jason, and you have arrived at the after party. The crown winner of last week is David, who financially, after 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks, David, 50 US dollars. Thank you so much, good brother, and congratulations to you, the big crown winner. In second place was our one and only Mrs. Jez Horse. There again, 25 US dollar financial gift. Thank you so much, dear sister, and congratulations to you. Folks, you can financially gift, as you know, all over at Entropy at a cost of 15% to you, and I will have that stream up running in just a couple of seconds. You can also ask and vote on questions while you were over there, even watch the show over there on Entropy. You may also financially gift on Cash App. The URL for both of those platforms is in the description below. And as you know, Jared and I evenly share the financial gifts with our guests on the after party. Now today, probably the guest that most people in tap history have been excited about, the one and only James Hake of the Hake Report is on tap today. James, please introduce yourself to our STEAM community. Tell them where they can find you, and then Mr. George will take us into this conversation.
Well, good evening, guys. I really appreciate you guys having me on the afterparty.tv. I am James Hake. I am host of the Hake Report. I also read Hake News, and I'm an expert on the Jesse Lee Peterson show, which many people have heard of. I work with Jesse Lee as a producer for Church with Jesse Lee Peterson, and on his network, I host the Hake Report live Monday through Friday, 9 to 11 a.m. Pacific time, which is noon to 2 Eastern. And that's thehakereport.com. And you can find me on YouTube while it lasts, which it's been lasting okay, and other platforms. Appreciate it, guys.
All right. Well, welcome, James Hake, and thank you for being here. As you know, we like to do on the after party when it is someone's first time on the show and you are in the hot seat. It is story time at first. So we want to hear what led you from wherever you want to start in your life to where you are now, speaking out, being a public voice, putting your name and your face out there, any kind of anecdotes, aha moments, realizations. We notice, there's a trend. It's for a lot of people, it's either like one thing happened or they saw something and the penny dropped, or with other people, it was just like a gradual like turning of the knob of different experiences or different observations they made about the world. A lot of people were taught certain things, especially in school, sometimes at home, sometimes not, but definitely at school and by the media, they were shown certain things. But then when they went out in the world and had experiences, they saw that there was an incongruence there and had to deal with that and had to figure out what was really going on. So yeah, whatever you feel appropriate to share about your background and growing up, and what led you to do the kind of work that you do today.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. I am James Hake. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in the suburbs of LA, in one suburb specifically, Temple City, El Monte, Arcadia area near Pasadena, California. I'm white in a white Christian family and quite Christian extended family, pretty together people, upstanding. I was always like the decent student in school, pretty up there in terms of like among classmates, including the Asians, the smart Asians. Sometimes the Asians would copy off of me. And so I went to school with Asians and Hispanics and Asians. And a lot of them were Christian or Christian friendly, many of them not. And most of them, as I grew older and older, I realized were a lot more liberal and not always like, they started to believe more and more into this racism thing and the LGBT friendly thing, which is a little overly friendly in a way that's not even helpful for that so-called community. And went to church. That was about the only place, and even church was a little bit more liberal than I felt that I was personally. and that my family was. But it was not so off the deep end as it is today, in that we learned in school that slavery happened and the Civil War happened, and there were good and bad slave owners, and there were good and bad things that people did on all sides, which is a matter of common sense. When you look at any situation between groups of people, there are good and bad people. And going into college, I was exposed to like a lot more. I went to Pasadena City College, which had a lot of blacks over there and others, international people. I went to a Christian college, a so-called Christian college, and that was really, I was studying art, and that was really liberal, but I didn't really, at that point, I was straying away from politics. George W. Bush was in office. I was seeing all this division and nastiness amongst people.
What kind of art program was it?
Well, I picked art with an emphasis in graphic design because I didn't want to write. I didn't want to end up teaching. I figured I could make CD covers for the underground Christian bands that I was into or whatever.
Okay, yeah. So it's more graphic art, not say fine art where you might get more Western civilization history type stuff.
Right. I didn't go into the art history stuff at all. I read a little bit about that stuff and was exposed to it, and I did painting, and I was exposed to all those artsy liberals, but
was there an anti-Western what would you call it, like shadow cast over the department at that time?
It wasn't so anti-Western that I noticed. It was you could say it was kind of anti-capitalism. There was a big dismissiveness toward this Christian artist, if you will, named Thomas Kincaid, who sold all of his art on mugs and blankets and all the Christian ladies at these Christian bookstores.
I know who you're talking about.
He was the painter of light. And so they mocked him. He was their whipping boy, which,
to be fair, Roger Scruton has too, but I think more for aesthetic reasons.
Right. And I didn't care either way. I was more just, I stayed to myself. I was a commuter for most of the time. I didn't really get in with the college crowd, kids stuff. And later on, I started hanging out with people more. But there were people that I kind of admired, even if I didn't really agree with their politics. Their politics didn't really come into play a lot, except when that was around the time that Arnold Schwarzenegger was running for governor after the recall of one of the governors. So I was exposed to, such and such is too conservative for me. And so I just it was kind of in the back of my mind. There was this European professor who was not really European. He just had this Eurocentric background in the sense that Euro had gone more globalist, more cosmopolitan. He was actually from like some island country or something. But he was very dismissive toward Americans and American culture. And I just laughed along with whatever he was saying. And now I kind of go against him, and we're just kind of have this antagonistic relationship.
Before we get too much further from your college, I wanted to reel you back just for a second.
Yeah.
When you were younger, you were going to church. And I attended a lot of different churches when I was younger, different denominations, as well as Catholic, and I even checked out the Mormons. And you saw a lot of anti-whiteism at the pulpit. And you were saying a moment ago that you referred to it as pretty liberal, not as bad as it is today.
Yeah.
So was that something that was like a point of awareness for your family? Like, was your mother and father, did they ever talk about in the family setting, like, wow, that was not really a very Christian thing that was talked about at church today, young Hake? And it was actually, we view it in the family a little bit differently like this. Did you feel like a little bit of a family cocoon against some of what was being taught at church at the time?
Not really. And honestly, when I was going to those churches, I was pretty uninvolved in the churches. I didn't go to the youth group stuff. I was kind of a loner at that time. And the pastors were fairly conservative. They were boomers or older who were, they didn't really go for they didn't go for the social liberal stuff. They didn't really talk about race much at all. And so I didn't really get too exposed to that. If anything, I got exposed to that at the Christian liberal arts college that I attended, Azusa Pacific University. And that was more like, it was overly gay friendly, overly feminist friendly. There was a little bit of like the women preaching stuff over at these churches, women leading, but even that was not so out of control as it is today. So no, it wasn't. And honestly, my parents didn't talk much about politics. My dad's kind of quiet about it, although he is pretty conservative. And he would say some things sometimes that would differ from what I had learned in school, which I didn't really talk with him about. I was homeschooled a couple of years because they wanted to be a little bit more involved in my life. But he said something that was sympathetic to the South at one point, because we had a friend who had moved to the South, and she talked about how her neighbors would talk down in Tennessee, and talking about how the South would, I don't know if it was the South would rise again, but something about just, this was 90s, late 80s, how something would turn around. And my dad made a comment. It was just a side comment, and I didn't have any idea what he meant. But he said, yeah, I sometimes wish that would happen. And he was born and raised in Southern California amongst whites and Hispanics at that point. And our neighborhood had transformed to be more Asian and Hispanic later throughout the course of his life. And he saw the McMansions, the Asian McMansions being, transforming with the look of the neighborhood. But it made me realize, oh, there's more to this history stuff than even I'm taught at school, that people can think quite differently. So it made me stop and wonder. And I think at that point that may have been the start of when I started to not accept the mainstream narrative, which I still continued to like swallow sometimes, because, they would be very dismissive of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and later, like in 2011 and 2012, of Maricopa County, Arizona, he was trying to protect the Maricopa County, Arizona, from the illegal alien problem. There was a lot of criminal illegal aliens in that area, and he was trying to help deal with the situation. And he was just panned and slammed in the media. And so I just looked at this man who was a little bit overweight, and I was like, yeah, he's probably not that good. But even then, I knew that I shouldn't be believing the media. And then I was exposed to Jesse Lee Peterson, and he was interviewing Sheriff Joe and really respecting him. And I really respected Jesse Lee. I learned about him through word of mouth, and I was dissatisfied with the church and I was one who would go to my mother for spiritual advice, which may be ill-advised as a college student. After college, I learned about Jesse Lee Peterson through word of mouth, and he had this no excuse mindset, based right and wrong. And he talked about the immigration situation. We need to send all the illegals back. And that was a shocking statement for me to hear. But hearing him interview people and debating liberal women who were for the immigrants staying here, the illegals staying here, he said, is it right that they come in here and take our services and push out, kind of push out the blacks who are either on welfare or trying to work and can't get their work because they're having to compete with the immigrant labor and the illegal labor? Is it right that they're coming in here? And she couldn't answer, yes, it's right, or no, it's not right. She would not answer it. And so he broke it down to simple right and wrong. And then I realized, you know what? We don't have to just accept, oh, they're here, let's just roll over and let them continue to come here. No, we don't have to accept that. That's not right. It's not good for them, because they should want what's right too. The illegals themselves should want what's right. And so just hearing him break things down into simple right and wrong and respecting respectable men like Sheriff Joe Arpaio, I realized that I really have no clue what's going on in the world, and nor should I trust the media at all. So that was, and then George Zimmerman situation came along with Trayvon Martin, and basically I got my news from the Jesse Lee Peterson show. As a listener every morning, 6 a.m., I would get to work an hour early, listen when I could, and then do my work from 7 to whatever I did. And I realized a lot of things were really unfair, and it was like a lynch mob mentality. And I knew this all along. I knew this since like 7th grade, that whites are constantly being suspected of this imaginary racism thing. And it was a shocking thing to me to find out that people actually took guys like Al Sharpton seriously. I thought he was just this big joke that people propped up in the media because, I don't know, I guess he was entertaining, or he was involved in this civil rights movement or something. But he was just a guy who just loved attention. So it was.
What did Jesse say about figures like Al Sharpton?
He came out with a book called Scam: How the Black Leadership Exploits Black America. And that was in like 2005, I think, before I ever heard of him. But he was saying things about them that I'm like, yeah, I know this stuff is true. just look at them. These people are jokes. I can't believe that anybody takes them seriously. He said that they are, he called them race hustlers, which you would hear from guys like Bill O'Reilly as well in Fox News, who used to interview Jesse Lee when he was on Fox News in the earlier 2000s and 90s. And he would talk about how he would call them poverty pimps, and just say that they are liars because they cast stuff as a race issue that's not a race issue. They're constantly smearing whites when they're the ones who are hating the whites. It's not the whites hating the blacks, it's the blacks hating the whites and being suspicious of them and constantly having this false anger and resentment about slavery and things, when in reality they should be thankful that their ancestors suffered, that they could be here in the greatest country in the world, and they should love white people, not hate them and be suspicious of them.
That was I could see that going both ways, honestly. I don't know if we're going to slice and dice all of that right now, but that's Jesse's take on that. I think more I go in the direction of if there is a redemption narrative, it's already happened, because white countries, England was earlier than America, in, I don't know, 1801, 1802, but white countries were the first places on earth in history that we know of that started to outlaw slavery on moral grounds. So we already did that reflection. We already had those conversations and that wrestling with that, and said, okay, we're not gonna do this. So even if you do take the angle of a redemption arc, it's already happened. But
yeah,
that's my perspective. I'm not, trying to put words in your mouth, but
I read about what's that?
No, I was just saying. I mean, that's Jesse's position, that
he said that we should be thankful for slavery. Yeah, he said thank God for slavery. And he said it was a rough ride. It was kind of like riding coach on an airplane coming over here, but we didn't. He said thank God we didn't have to cross the border illegally or have to wait in line. I was born here. My parents were born here. My grandparents were born here. And I learned good work ethic. He grew up on a plantation in Alabama. I guess they were sharecroppers or something. I'm not sure. And although he was, quote unquote, poor, he didn't know he was poor. They lived under a tin roof. He had to go outside to use the outhouse. It wasn't indoor plumbing, but they were upstanding, moral, solid people that they kept to themselves in the Jim Crow. He grew up in the Jim Crow era, and it wasn't this melodrama that people were saying. In fact, I've pulled this out before. He saw the drinking water signs with colors only on this side, whites only on this side. But they went along with it, and they knew that it was the government. Not all white people necessarily agreed with it, and it was just a situation.
Well,
and they didn't need to be resentful about it.
Right.
So.
Well, it's really interesting to me, especially being a very proud Southerner, Virginian, that you were in the system, if you will, and then you had this family friend who spoke positively about the South, your father, and your father then echoed this, and this opened your eyes to other possibilities, other interpretations, rather than this monolithic anti-white narrative that was being shoved down our throat. And then you come across, think about this, folks. So you have this proud white Southerner. I guess this woman was a white Southerner.
She was actually a Dutch Indonesian woman who moved out there with her parents, and she came and visit. She was a family friend who lived near us, and then she moved out there, and she was friendly with the neighbors.
How about that? So you had this Dutch Indonesian person become essentially self-identified proud Southerner, speak to Hake's father. Hake's father, Southern Californian, which are great people, by the way. Almost everybody I meet, that's like generations in Southern California, great folks.
Yeah.
And so then Hake's father has some positive things to say about the South, and that leads Hake to listening to Jesse Lee Peterson, this Black guy that grew up in the Jim Crow era, and you hear him talk about things like he referred to he interviewed Sheriff Joe and referred to he said, I guess he talked about illegal aliens, and this all stuff got your attention and sort of, I guess, set the trajectory that you then the narrative arc that you then followed out of the anti-white narrative.
Yeah.
And you ended up working then with Jesse, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Also in college, I just saw this calling George W. Bush Hitler and stuff like that. And I was no big fan of George W. Bush. I voted for him twice, which maybe I should be ashamed of that. I don't know. I don't like any of the Democrats. I think I like the Democrats much less, but I just saw this melodrama against him. And I understand the war was maybe not ideal or maybe it was outright evil, but these people were not standing for good. And there was this nasty dismissiveness and hatred, open hatred. Joe Rogan mentioned this at one point in an interview with that Jordan Peterson, that you can smear and mock relentlessly white men. And specifically during those times when the early mid 2000s, Southerners like just mock people with this Southern accent, mock the Christians, mock the whites. And so I noticed that. I'm like, I'm not going to go along with this bandwagon where you can mock the Southerners, but nobody else you can't be quote unquote bigoted against. And so, yeah, I ended up coming to Jesse's church. I didn't care or know about his politics or the fact that he was Black. I was just looking for the truth about, Christianity and life and living in a way that had no excuses and I could have some self-respect. And I realized that his politics really were right. When I heard him make this comment about sending the illegals back, I'm like, well, maybe he's not right about everything, but I didn't care about it because I knew he was right about the spiritual stuff. And then he broke it down to right and wrong, and I realized he's right about the politics too. And I started working for him as a producer several years after attending his church regularly and volunteering and coming to Second Amendment rallies and anti-NAACP rallies and helping him as a bodyguard when he went on speaking engagements. So I became his radio producer when he started a school. He had
when was that?
That was late 2013. So you started going
to his church. His church happened to be near you.
Yeah, in West LA. I started driving 35 minutes to church every Sunday. So it wasn't super close, but it was a nice Sunday drive. There's no traffic on Sundays, at least in the mornings. And so I would come to his church. He offered me a job one of the early days that he saw me. I don't know what he saw in me that he offered me this job, but I didn't end up taking it. I stayed working for a small business at that point for several years. But he offered me again to be this radio producer. I had no experience in even like looking at politics, but I started, learning the ropes from his PR guy on being a radio show producer for his radio show at the time. And he was on terrestrial radio at that time and not streaming on YouTube. This was before we even really knew. I don't even know if we could have streamed live on YouTube in those years.
I don't even know when. Yeah, when did it? When did it start? When did streaming on YouTube even start? I don't know. Maybe someone in the chat could tell us.
Yeah,
internet historians. So he hires you as a radio producer, and you didn't have experience. But had you spoken to him about other things?
I had by that point. I was known to him as like a regular churchgoer. I had been volunteering with him and even traveling with him sometimes as an assistant and as a bodyguard to different universities and prisons where he would speak to juvenile detention centers and speaking to prisoners and Republican clubs and college clubs and do debates and things. Mm-hmm. So I would travel with him, and he knew, and his employees knew that I was on board with the message. So he worked with me, and I got to be his producer and work with his team here. And since then, things have just grown. It's been really cool.
So as you're speaking, the theme I'm curious about is, we know in the mainstream, most people are taught that, it's silly to identify with race in any way, shape, or form. And I've been through my own things with that. I always had an innate sense of kind of a connection to my European roots, but at the same time, it wasn't for a lot of people. It's not something that you consciously think of, every day, unless you have certain experiences or certain challenges you have to deal with that put it right in your face. Like Jason had some earlier experiences in school that were a little more dramatic. Okay, so you saw what's going on, but you're also very ensconced in this world, Jesse Lee Peterson and his church. So you're working, I'm sure, black, white, other people of different backgrounds there. So in one regard, people might say, well, that's what America is supposed to be. It's all these different people coming together. It's values. How do you mix that kind of thing? Because on a personal level, I certainly do believe, there's still ample time and space for, on a personal level, when I meet someone one-on-one and it's an appropriate situation and there's reciprocity and back and forth, I'm not sitting there thinking to myself, categorizing like, this is a Chinese person and that's all I'm seeing them as. Like I'm trying to get the whole spectrum, the holistic swirl of what they are, their personality, the whole thing. So I can understand that on a personal level. But as we often speak about here too, and Jason has come up with a lot of terms and perspectives to help clarify this for people, at the end of the day, there are different instincts in general that the different ethnicities and races of man have. That actually is true diversity, and that's a beautiful thing. When 10 million people of German descent get together and build a town, it's going to look and feel and function different than when 10 million Chinese people get together and build a town. There's reasons for that.
Yeah.
So how do you square, or how do you balance those things? Like on the one side of wanting to meet people where they are and not have like race be this like heavy thing that is the only thing, but at the same time, not just go along with this very milquetoast, mainstream American thing about we're all the same, we all bleed red, and that's it. Which, there's like a whole scale of that. Some people, to them, it's just this nice little platitude, but there are a lot of people that use that to shoehorn in a lot of dangerous agendas.
Right.
And it's obviously certainly the first step. It's the camel's nose under the tent to making white people, just destroying white people's sense of pride and identity, and even thinking themselves as white. Again, Jason's work with Go Free, so much of it is about the psychological damage. There are our people, so many of our people are psychologically damaged. We've had 8, if I'm correct, Jason, people who wrote in who were on the brink of suicide, that because of the work here in this community came
9.
back from suicide. Is 9 now? 9 now? Yeah. I mean, that is the extent when the media says, oh, we're privileged and we have nothing to complain about. When you're told from infancy that what you can't escape, immutable characteristics, are inherently evil, like you have this original sin, it's this new religion.
Yeah.
I don't have to tell you. So how do you balance those things?
Well, I see it as, and thankfully I wasn't really exposed to that level of, although I think that we all were, I wasn't exposed to, even including my parents and maybe their parents. I wasn't really exposed to the nasty level that it is present day, that kids are facing today, children are facing today, with misguided college graduate female Black Lives Matter supporters of any race teaching their children just these false values, the LGBT stuff, the Trump is evil stuff, the all whites are racist type stuff, and this racism thing is so real. I was exposed to a little bit of it, discrimination. I was taught that discrimination was a bad thing, but then I'm like, wait a minute, we all discriminate, and discrimination it's basically a right. And coming to Jesse's church where he just thinks freely, and he said, the sit-ins, the civil rights sit-ins were wrong, because you think about it. You as a business owner, you built this business with your money, and now you're forced to serve people whom you don't want to serve. That's not right. Why would you even want to go somewhere where you're not wanted? That is not. And so he felt that probably a lot of it, the civil rights movement was misguided, and a lack of love for white people on the part of the blacks and the people and the other whites who were forcing this on other people. Anti-discrimination laws are not right. But I see it as evil. Like you said, they try to shoehorn this notion of, oh, a little diversity is fine, and there are decent people of all races. Well, that's true, but there's also evil people. And I think the majority of people are evil and are easily influenced by evil, especially when you take away the men and you undermine Christianity and you undermine the whites. So we have the kingdom of Satan, which is the dominant narrative, the establishment, if you will, the rhinos who dominate the Republican Party, the Democrats and the mainstream media, and anybody who thinks a little independently, speaks a little too freely, they get clamped down on, whether it's Whoopi Goldberg talking about this is basic evil, people being evil to one another. And she gets clamped down on because you can't say it's evil, which all people are guilty of and all people can be guilty of. No, it has to be racism, which only whites can be guilty of. And whites are the common enemy to all of these people. So just don't fall for that. And I find race and different people's cultures and everything to be quite interesting. I frequently will ask my callers, what are you? I get black callers. I get callers from overseas. I get whites, Hispanics, Asians, Canadians, which they can be anything because Canada is overrun, perhaps even more than America right now. But you'll find people who are about truth, and you'll find people who are pretending to be about truth, and you'll find people who are just outright liars. And so I don't have any ill will toward anybody who identifies with their race, because I think that it's a normal thing to do. You should look after your family first, and we all notice that white countries are the ones that have this diversity forced upon them, or they tend to be open to it for some reason. And and they're the ones that they turn around and call them racist. So, which is Satan's ploy. Because
I'm curious to just get in a quick side question here for a minute.
yeah,
What kind of perspectives do you get when you have those international callers? Especially if do you have ever a decent number of people listening from outside of North America? Do you ever get calls from that far abroad, that far afield?
yeah, I have callers from like Bulgaria, Sweden, UK
Yeah, so what kind of
occasionally.
questions and when they listen to you and the I guess the different programs under the umbrella of what Jesse Lee Peterson does and
Yeah,
ethos that you guys are presenting, how do international people take that, and what do they ask about what's going on in America?
those guys by and large are ones who are looking for the truth. They found Jesse or they found me, and they are guys who spiritually they're looking for what's right, get away from this victimhood stuff, to work and not be under, because they're like socialism that's overrun. Many of these callers aren't even white, but they're white friendly because they see that this is not they see that this is an unjust attack on the whites, and it's not good for the country that they're supposed to be living in. And so they, as far as how they see America, I couldn't tell you, but they generally agree with me about what's going on, that this is an evil attack on America, who from the people who are supposedly running America, you know? So the enemies are within primarily, and it's not Russia, it's not China, although China's doesn't have our best interests at heart, but it's the enemies are within.
And something you said too, I know we want to develop this more. We were talking a little about this before the show, is and you started to say that as I was saying as well, that it's not the only ingredient, but race and where you come from. It's a tricky thing because especially for white people, it's like water to a fish. I often say you don't realize why you like certain things, certain places or activities or architecture just feels more comfortable.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean and it doesn't that's different from being interested in something because we're a tricky bunch because we go out and explore. You know, we sail the seas. So it doesn't mean you might like pagodas or something. You might like the cultures or the philosophies of non-Western cultures. That's a white thing too, and that's not a recent thing. I know it's been exploited recently, but anytime going back to when Marco Polo went to China and started to bring things back,
yeah,
and trade opened up more, Europe began this chinoiserie in the 1700s, I think, and Marco Polo was before that. But by the time the trade routes and I guess the ship technology improved, oh man, this is something exotic, and you go crazy for it. You know, we're curious people. We like to soak up all the different things out there. So it's a tricky thing because you try to explain this to someone who are like, well, but I have friends from different cultures and I like Indian food and all this stuff. And that's great. I do too. I do
that's
too. You know, I come from a pretty urban, multicultural background myself, but it's not an either or thing. It doesn't mean that
right.
you hate yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't sometimes advocate from that position of us, because ultimately no one's going to advocate for us as us. I could respect and be friends with people of all backgrounds, but imagine if any of the three of us, even if before we even open our mouths, look at the three of us. I put this to any listener who might be skeptical and say, Jared, James, Jason, I guess it's all J's tonight. Um, how about one of you gets up and speaks at the next meeting of African Americans or the Chinese
Right.
Business Owners Association? It's we can't speak as those people for those people. There does come a point where it means something to be of a certain heritage. So what we really want to talk about and get a lot of your thoughts on, definitely hear from the chat if they have any thoughts on this, is all of our, again, that's not the only thing that defines a person, but it's an ingredient, and when it's missing, you're kind of lopsided if you haven't dealt with and wrestled with this aspect of yourself. And you actually can stand with a straight spine, advocate for yourself unapologetically, the people you come from, recognize the culture you come from. It's actually better for everybody, and we all respect each other more, especially right now with the attacks, the anti-white attacks. And not that you're doing it to curry favor with other people. That should never be your primary motivation. But it just so happens as a secondary cause that, I've found, I know Jason's found, that people of other races actually do respect you more when you have a backbone. For all these fawning anti-white whites
Yeah.
that try to treat non-white people like they're pets and like, oh, like, let us bow down and apologize or adopt, we're going to make sure we adopt kids that aren't white and then parade them around. They respect people like us more, actually. And again, not that
Yeah.
that's the primary motivation, but from that point of respect, I think people can get along better, have
Right.
healthier. If we were going to share these spaces, it's a much healthier way to do it. But it's a broad topic. It can go in a lot of places. But yeah, please, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't growing up amongst Hispanics and Asians, when I would put my seatbelt on in the back seat, they would be like, "That's so white," or I would be good at school or whatever, and you're being white. Or I wanted to be honest. It was, I don't know if it was white or Christian of me, but it was how I was raised, and it's different from how many of these people who they came here as immigrants or whatever, they were brought here by churches into Los Angeles, and they grew up amongst blacks in Los Angeles and had bad experiences. And then they come to El Monte, California, and there's a mix of bad kids and halfway decent kids. And then there's me that's kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, where I used to be the norm in Los Angeles. I do notice that they notice that I'm white in ways that I don't even realize is white.
Those aren't little silly things.
Right.
I don't want to cut you off, but even the putting the seatbelt on, and even if it was like, even if they were your friends, again, like even if it wasn't a situation where you were getting beat up for it, if it was a more serious situation, that's still not a little thing. It might sound like a little passing detail, but you putting the seatbelt on means that when you grow up to be a man, you're going to think about civics in a different way.
Yeah.
That little detail actually there's a chain event of how you see the world and how you move through the world that actually has pretty big consequences. But please go on.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed putting the shopping cart back. I always put the shopping cart back.
That's big with me. That's big with me.
Yeah.
You can't be in my inner circle if you don't put the shopping cart back.
Yeah. You're just a scumbag. But
just to say it plainly.
Right. But I did notice that stuff, and I noticed later that they were willing to bend rules and steal and get the hookup and be more lenient on illegals, which many of them I didn't know, but they were illegals or their parents
What do you
were.
say? What do you say to the person that fires back and says, "James, that's a poverty thing. They're just trying to survive. It's not a white, black, Hispanic thing."
It's right versus wrong, and people are not that poor that they need to be doing that. My parents didn't grow up with money, and when they started out, they didn't have money, but they worked. And when you work at especially my mother stayed home after she had started having the kids, and which you could do back then. And some people still do it, which I really respect. I saw his work ethic and his discipline and his integrity. And I remember stories where one time he did like sneak my brother into like a medieval times when he was just one day over being young enough to get the special deal. And then his conscience bugged him and he sent them extra money or whatever. And so just that level of honesty that is just a high trust society. And that's conducive to not having to lock your doors at night. But now we we didn't lock our doors, and we had a Guatemalan come in when I was a kid from what we think it was a Guatemalan, an illegal who was just looking for a place to sleep, a home invader, but he wasn't trying to do any harm. He was just trying to find a place to sleep. And luckily he went into our house and not the Mexican neighbor across the street whose wife has a gun by her bed. So that hospitality, and like what you said, exploring and appreciating other cultures is seemingly more a white thing. And so we're more welcoming and fair-minded towards others, seemingly, than others are towards us. And so that's why you have to be wise and not foolish, and not like this female-minded false version of tolerance is what they call it, or what they used to call it, where you just roll over and give up your country and your community. So I think about the whites of like the founding fathers and stuff, and I just wonder what we're missing and how we can get back to that kind of manhood where we can fight in the right way and not in a foolish way, and start winning, because it would be nice.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, especially you touching upon the being like more manly. I think as white men, and this is something we really wanted to talk about tonight, and looks like we're coming up on about 12 minutes before we start taking your questions and comments for James. But the white race, men in general, are under attack. The white race, obviously, specifically, it's just anti-whiteism all day, all the time.
Yeah.
We see a lot of these other folks of other races that are, in many respects, similarly minded. They want the same sorts of things. They need the same sorts of things: law and order, fair treatment, etc. They end up also being attacked, or collateral damage as a consequence of anti-whiteism. And so, as white males, the time really has come for us to be men of the West again. And something we talk about, and something we wanted to talk about today, is that the white race standing up for ourselves again will be good for everyone across the West. And this is, we talk, James, all the time on Going Free on Sundays about how this evil of our age, it goes under the rubric of anti-whiteism, and destroys all things that everyone in the West needs. Everything people in the West want. They want civility, etc. Everything is destroyed under the flag of anti-whiteism. White people had something to, whether or not white people actually invented it, or white people have propagated it, or white people have, we're the reason why that it exists in Western civilization. Irrespective of all of that, it's destroyed all of these things that are essential for everyone's well-being and happiness, and the perpetuating their lifestyles and moving ahead in the world, etc. All of that is destroyed under the rubric of anti-whiteism. So really standing up for ourselves and being open to good-natured folks, good-hearted, good character, moral folks of all races to be able to come together and oppose anti-whiteism is what's going to really reclaim our destiny, is what's going to ensure that we can put down this threat that's destroying all of civilization for everyone who lives across the West. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and how coming together consciously against anti-whiteism, not just the white race, but people of all immutable characteristics, good-hearted people of all immutable characteristics, coming together to put this down, can be a benefit to everyone of all immutable characteristics within the West.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's really an evil attack. It's evil versus good. And why are they anti-white? I think it's because, like, from what I can tell, is whites tend to be more in the way of the people who are in power for whatever reason, and the people who are, evil kind of affects people, and it tilts your morals upside down, where evil is good and good is evil in your your blind eyes. And it's sort of, I call it frequently a female mindset. I frequently will invoke the term communism, and I like how you that's term a lot of people don't understand, and I don't even know if I really fully understand it, but I just understand it to be lying and calling good evil and evil good, and subverting, overwhelming and breaking the system, as we've seen with the immigration situation and the tearing down and the shutdown. I call them the communist shutdowns in the name of, the virus. All of this overprotective idea of protecting us from the virus and feeling sorry for the people who are coming in here for a better life. All of this female-minded, let's just roll over and let the country be overwhelmed and the system overwhelmed and either destroyed or overrun to where we have people who have not our values running the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see it as a lot of people benefit from it monetarily. A lot of people benefit from an ego standpoint. They love just seeing people wearing the masks and seeing the independent thinking. Ever so often, independent thinking people apologize for saying something true or independent thinking, like I mentioned about Whoopi and others. Or Trump never apologized, or rarely would apologize.
That's right.
And that was so refreshing to see a politician, a man, stand up on when he told the truth. It was only overreaction when he told the truth, and they would try to call it a lie. But you're right; it is anti-white and it's anti-good.
Yeah.
So it's good versus evil, and I loved Jared George's point that we don't need to be leaning on the so-called minorities who say something who agree with us and prop them up, and then hide behind them to speak for us. We can speak for ourselves, and we should speak for ourselves. Everyone should speak for himself. So
yeah, especially anti-white whites, because then that becomes the perceived being the operative word, consensus, because that's all the mainstream media shows. We live in a time of terrible imbalances. We're given narratives in the media. We're given narratives by college professors that cherry pick certain things. Just to go back to the example I mentioned earlier, you'll hear about the things in slavery that were painful and challenging, but you'll never hear it said that, well, it was also Western countries that were the first to struggle with it morally and say, world history, maybe we shouldn't do this purely on moral grounds. Why don't you have to write 10-page essays in college about that as well? The philosophy, morality, the ideology that led to that, and what was going on there. So it's all of these different balances out of whack, and anti-white whites speaking as if they're speaking for all white people, and that like we all had a meeting, and it's like, oh no, we all hate ourselves, and it's not cool to be white, we can't dance, all this and that. You see people who kind of just go along with these mimetics, which, I mean, I know that word took off with the internet, but it had meaning even before the internet. It's just another way of what I'm saying is the social consensus is even certain elements of rock music and even rap music. I mean, rap is definitely a product of the African-American people and experience by and large. But you could point to these things where, like, they used to do these fast rhymes in Ireland, or there's like these rhythms and chord progressions that relate to the blues from old Anglo or Celtic folk music in the British Isles. It's not so cut and dry. It's just that we don't get the whole story. So we're told, you're shown this little sliver, and the sliver is in media and movies and music, is all of these other cultures are spicy, interesting, rhythmic, in touch with their soulful self, sexual, sexy, attractive, and we are very like buttoned up, plain, vanilla, white bread, boring. I mean, that's not even the worst of it, but even that right there That's sick. That's psychologically damaging. That's
Yeah,
telling
it's evil.
kids that they're weaker, they're not as interesting, they're not as attractive. That's psychological damage. And it comes from all kinds of sides. I mean, I've seen plenty of women, social media, or people in these circles who, you could say there's a dark and a light to each side. The feminine also very much has a protective instinct and have been builders of culture along with the men. Plenty of examples from history. So I don't, from, again, me personally, I don't know if it's purely like a female mind thing. It's more of a warp of the female mind. And
Yeah,
there's plenty
right.
of there's plenty of male politicians that are letting this happen, making this
Yep.
happen too. So I think it's just that, you know, you want to get the balance right so that it's the right expression of femininity, it's the right expression of masculinity, and you
Right.
want to get that balance right where it's good masculine and good feminine, and they come together to form good families or be affecting the culture in a good way. It's just, the way I would put it is just getting things back on balance. The world, as you said, we live in a world of imbalances. It's never going to be perfectly balanced. It's like trying to make heaven on earth, but I think we can at least do our best to approximate those divine balances a little better than we're doing right now.
Hey, I think that we have a really revolutionary, and it's thought revolution here, censors and anti-whites who are listening. It's the thought revolutionary idea here. The reality that, and when we speak it, it's almost like to speak a magic spell to say, because you can like feel it, to say that the white race is going to have to become healthy for the West to be healthy again for all peoples.
Yeah.
And if the good Black people, good Hispanic people, good people of all backgrounds who want to have functioning families, who want to have, who want to put an end to all of the drug issues and the family divorce courts and the breakups and all of these things that we see that are so deleterious across the West. Every time we turn around, we see that the attack on them is in the name of anti-whiteism.
Yeah.
This is this is what the white male has, even all the way down to an attack on mathematics.
Right.
They say this is the white male's mathematics. So we've got to give it. Well, everyone is going to suffer if we change how we understand and approach and implement or not implement mathematics. And it doesn't matter where at mathematics came from. What matters is that it's being destroyed in the name of anti-whiteism, harming white people because white people deserve to be harmed or something. And let me tell you something else, young men out there, if you're wondering, I know there were a lot of guys recently from a couple different organizations, young men, courageous men who were recently doxxed, and more of them are being doxxed. They were out doing activities that were not the best activities. I'm telling you what, young men, if you stand up, you don't LARP, you be a real man, you be a man of the West, and you will attract gorgeous, magnificent women, real women of the West. And you won't have to deal with these really broken women that are out there that society has made into a mess of pieces, just detritus, who then make your life miserable. And being a man is what we're doing here by defining who and what we are and what heroism is going to look like and under what banner we're going to fly, and by being compassionate and by being brave because we love. That's what being a man really is, not focused on disliking someone else. And I tell you what, this, Jared, I've not seen this like anything like this before. We have James, we have guests that come on like James Edwards, who a lot of people really like, but they love you. I mean, that's just, they absolutely love James. You have an absolute following, my friend.
Wow,
so,
that's nice.
yeah,
That's great.
I mean, you are the man. But any other thoughts before we take a look at these questions and financial gifts and the like? But any other thoughts on this whole idea that getting healthier as a people, as a white race, is going to benefit everyone? Or just any thoughts you might have on the attack on the family? Because that, of course, is done under the banner of anti. And we notice that somebody like Jesse Lee who comes out and objects to this attacks on the family, attacks on men, they end up getting called, like Jesse will end up getting called the same slanders that they use for somebody like me. You know, they'll call him a racist. They'll even call him a white supremacist because he gets in the way of anti-white. That really tells you what they're after.
Because they see it's good. They see it could be good for white people, so they don't like what he's saying. Yeah.
Right.
And it's good for blacks too. This Bill O'Reilly would always get accused of racism anytime he criticized the destruction of the black family. Think about how the black community is. Jesse Lee makes this point all the time when he goes out and speaks, is that blacks are not exposed to the truth. They have not exposed to it in the homes because their parents for generations have been brainwashed into this racism lie. They're not getting it in their churches because the black churches are just filled with this liberal ideology and anti-white stuff, and the black preachers are not called by God. They, as he says, called by their mama, and it's woman-headed households so frequently, including even when the father's there, the father's acting like a woman with them, and they're not exposed to the truth among the mainstream media or the politicians, including the Republicans, most of the Republicans. It's disgraceful. And then whites are afraid, he says, and there's a lot of truth to it in the mainstream and amongst so many, that they're afraid to tell the truth to the blacks for fear of being called racist or losing their job or whatever, being censored or whatever. And the ones who are telling the truth are getting censored. And so if we were to start speaking out, and that would be exposure to the truth, there would be a few blacks, and it only takes a few, who see that that's true. think about how one man can change the world. Trump changed a lot. Jesus changed a lot. And your life is your platform. Getting censored on the internet is an evil thing. It's un-American. It's anti-American, even though these companies that are doing it are supposedly Americans.
Right.
But the way that you live, you mentioned those young men who've been doxxed and who maybe have been doing ill-advised things. When I started to become aware of the evil of the world, it was the Obama administration. I started lashing out on Facebook or whatever and losing a lot of friends unnecessarily because I was panicking about how I have to do something to fight this evil. When in reality, you live your life and things will open up. Follow God's path. Be orderly about it and civilized about it. And there's a time to be loud, and there's a time for everything, right? But you follow what's right and be wise and measured, and you'll go far, and you'll find friends where you don't expect, and doors will open. And you don't have to try to make it happen because you're not God. And a lot of these, Jared is right. A lot of these politicians are male politicians, but they are not men. They're not thinking like clear thinking men, and the women who think clearly can see right through that too. It's true.
Well, before Jason gets to the question, just to tack on a little last thing, as you were saying, do you find, I'd imagine working for the Jesse Lee Peterson show for years, it's a staff where you have people of different backgrounds, black, white, perhaps some others. You find that the fact that you are comfortable in who you are, I've found this in my life, actually makes it easier to form friendships because it's not coming from false pretenses.
Right.
It's like, you know who you are, and it's interesting to point out the differences, but there's still plenty of things we can find that are similarities too, that it's not like we're talking about race 24/7, with friends of other races. But do you find that, or do you have any examples of that, of what it's like to be enmeshed where you can say, like you said on this show, you said a little while ago, there's certain things that on average white people have strengths in, with openness, curiosity, exploration. What is it like working in a multiracial staff where you're not the kind of thing that's presented by the mainstream, where you're cowering and you're hiding these things? You can own that, you could say that. and you can, I'm sure, hear from Black people what their experience is. And again, some of it is, okay, this is different between you guys and our guys. But then a lot of times it's just, hey, we're people hanging out.
Well,
Yeah.
I do notice that when you don't tiptoe and you don't pander and you don't try not to offend people, you don't feed that suspicion that Blacks so frequently have toward whites, because they can see the weakness. They can see they're not really showing them their true selves. And so they read it as racism and malice, when really it's just fear. And we don't know what to do with you people because you're constantly suspicious of us. And so we're going to act funny about it because we're insecure. And so that's going to feed a constant loop.
It's a loop.
And it's a total illusion and delusion on both sides. And the whites know that the Blacks are deluded, and the Blacks know that the whites are off. And
James, this is what I meant a little while ago when I said it's the anti-white whites that are kind of ruining it for everybody.
Yeah.
Because,
it's true.
Anyone that listens to what we do knows that Jason and I are about, wouldn't throw this around. But, when you get like the quick sketch from mainstream kind of people, anti-white people, you might hear certain slurs thrown at people like us sometimes, like supremacist, racist, things like that. Silly words, right? That racist doesn't mean anything, and it's really an anti-white slur. The funny thing is, and I've never said this on this show, but our audience knows me. They know I wouldn't say this to pander. I've never said this on our show because I don't want to sound like I'm pandering, but the truth of the matter is, for all the people that think I'm a certain way because it's not the only thing I do, but I do this show, we speak out about this, is I've had, and I'm sure you have too, better friendships, better relationships with Black people, or people of all races, but we were talking about Black in particular because you're Jesse Lee Peterson and you have a lot of Black friends and colleagues. They'll say to me things like, you're a cool white guy because you're not pandering and you're not apologizing, but you're also not making a big deal of it. It's the anti-white whites who have this Hollywood notion, or the poison that they got in school, that are, as you said, it's like they're trying to calculate everything. What does this look like? What does this sound like? And other people know that it's fake. If you're just reading, we're supposed to be the bad guys and the bigots. I probably have had better friendships with Black people than most of the people criticizing us.
Yeah. I saw this Sex in the City reboot clip that was circulating on Twitter, where this woman, and I never was into that show, of course, but this woman, this purportedly white woman, middle-aged, is just pandering to this Black female teacher of this class she's taking, and it just gets her into more trouble. And same thing with the NFL right now, where this Black head coach, under this Rooney rule, these teams have to interview two minority people when they're thinking about getting a new head coach. And so they'd already picked a coach who was white, I guess, but they had to do this Rooney rule thing. So even though they'd already made their decision, allegedly, they interview this Brian Flores guy, and Brian Flores, in a roundabout way, I don't know if it's his imagination or if it's true, says, oh, they only interviewed me under false pretenses. They're not following the Rooney rule. Well, they shouldn't even have the Rooney rule. It's stupid. Diversity is not a real value. It's a false value. It's a shallow imitation of reality, of being normal.
And Jason here got pretty far in college sports and could understand some of what it takes to get in the pros in that process, and can tell you that for all this coach's complaints right now, the NFL especially is designed to heavily favor talent and find athletes that are not white.
Yeah, and honestly, I heard that this guy isn't even a successful coach. I think that he has more losses than wins, according to one of my Black friends who was a football player himself, who texted me that. I was never into the NFL, and I just saw how it was pandering to this Komen for the Cure, this breast cancer stuff, which supports abortion, which is counterproductive to women's health. So it's all a big mess. NFL is poison.
Yeah, people haven't realized this has actually been in place for a very long time. These endeavors, these anti-white endeavors, and for us, these endeavors are all about excluding our people. And ultimately, we're talking about how it's us standing up for ourselves and becoming a healthy people is better for everyone. One of the ways that it's better for everyone when we stand up for ourselves, when we say, look, we're not going to allow there to be any more of, say, I mean, like every quarter in business, we can say, and this is happening. NFL's a business. You see these endeavors where they say, we are diversifying the workforce, and then now we've achieved this much more. And of course, what that means is we have this fewer number of white people.
Right.
And that's where we should be focused. And we should say, no more will you discriminate against our people. We're putting an end to this. And good people of all races should come forward and say, no more discriminating against white people on the basis of their race. And the only group you can legally and morally exclude right now and discriminate against is the white race. Everybody else can sue you. Everybody else will shame you, etc. So, but here's how us standing up for ourselves, and I'll get to these questions so we can wrap up this magnificent tap tonight. But the non-white folks who actually work hard and they have innate talent to be in whatever job it might be, those folks who are endeavoring to get there, they've paid their dues, and then they make it into whatever field it is they endeavor to be in, they are always going to end up looked at with suspicion. Are they here because they're non-white?
Exactly.
And no good person of any race is going to want to have that suspicion aimed at them. They're going to want people to look at them and say, oh, he paid his dues. She paid her dues. That's why they're here. Instead of this, maybe they're here because of their race. And I mean, you're looking at like this case with these coaches. What a surprise that you would end up with lousy coaches that were picked on the basis of their race.
Good point.
How are they going to? I mean, it's like flipping a coin. If you're or even worse odds than 50-50. If you're picking somebody based on, and that's why, by the way, James, we could be happy that we have all of these anti-white institutions, but they've gotten much worse at being discriminatory. Their desire to be discriminatory has grown, but they're dumber because they've been hiring people based on race rather than on their ability. If we were facing, say, like the 1950s American government with their mass efficiency and people hired on talent and intelligence, things would be much worse for us today than they are. I mean, we're facing people who dye their hair, crazy, like yellow, orange, and green. I mean,
that's a fair point. Our enemies destroy themselves. The enemies of decency are fighting amongst each other as well as trying to destroy us. But you're right, they're not competent. With corruption brings incompetence. That is so true.
Well said. And let's jump into these financial gifts and questions and comments, folks. It has been glorious, but we're going to do this, get some final statements from James as well, and then we're going to be tapping out tonight. But we're definitely going to have James back because he has been the favorite of all taps of all time, it appears. We have the great Slots, who is a magnificent advocate for white well-being, with us tonight over here on Cash App. And in the closing minutes, folks, you can financially gift on Cash App, URL in the description below. Also over there on Entropy, and I'll be keeping an eye up to the final seconds for your questions, comments, wherever they pop up. The great Slots, financially gifting $5. Thank you so much, good brother. And he writes with those $5, laugh my ass off, Jason. Come on, that flag. Who sent it? He asks. Well, brother, they said I would never pass the interview, so I decided to become the boss. That's why the flag is up. What other reason could there be? We also have, I'll spin around here, and looks like we have more than a handful of financial gifts, and we'll take a look back at Cash App in just a moment. We have the great Rory Herbert from across the pond, financially gifting $10. Thank you so much, good brother. He writes for James, says he was in downtown LA when the riots broke out in 92. The highways were full of shopkeepers in pickup trucks loaded with alcohol and tobacco, fleeing the city. He says here, I have the greatest respect for what he refers to as rooftop Koreans who stayed to defend their businesses and community. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. I was thankfully in the suburbs in those times. I think I was like in 4th or 5th grade or 6th grade or less. And I remember the smoke just filling up our yard in the late afternoon, evening.
Scary.
From those, I guess those were the Rodney King LA riots, over a man who they don't tell the whole story about Rodney King. Let's just put it that way. What a shame. Yes, I do. Yes, I do respect the rooftop Koreans, and there's some decent people who are clear thinking on that, and they see the attack on our country. It's not good.
Yeah, those images were really terrifying. Those folks getting up onto their roofs, working from dawn till dusk at their businesses, and then their community getting burned down around them, and they get up on their roofs, and a lot of that footage can still be found on the internet. And they were discharging weapons, so they were being shot at, and they were shooting back.
It was lawless.
It was
so evil, and that was widespread across this country. But we want to focus on the January 6th mostly peaceful protest. Give me a break. It's so backwards. It's that cherry picking that Jared mentioned. It's ridiculous. What a silly world.
Indeed. And we have No White Guilt Clips financially gifting $10 as well. Thank you so much, good brother. And he writes here, James, why do you think that many of those who hate and attack Christianity are reluctant to criticize Islam and Judaism?
I think because Christianity is more effective, more manly. What I understand about Judaism, I learned from Bill Lockwood, who appears on the Jesse Lee Peterson show. He said that it's socialism in religious garb is what I say Judaism? I think Islam, he said that. And Judaism, most of the Jewish people in this country tend to be atheists, tend to be quite liberal and not really nationalistic. Many of the conservative Jewish people who are religious, they didn't like Trump at first because they thought, oh, he's saying these horrible things. I think it's a soft sort of mindset where they believe in this political correctness and not so much America first. And so I think that the Christianity is more tough, more manly, and more no nonsense and morals. And you are wrong and you'd have to repent. The real Christianity anyway. Where it's kind of like the whites. The whites don't like nonsense in their communities. They're sort of self-policing, if you will. They don't even really need the police so much when it's like the Tea Party and the and even honestly the Charlottesville situation. The Charlottesville and the January 6th people, had it not been for the instigators and the people attacking the Charlottesville guys, there wouldn't have been violence, but the police didn't separate and keep the law and order because I don't think that the people in charge really wanted to keep the parties separate. So it was a hit. It was a hit piece. And every now and then there's going to be a white who gets angry and out of control and does something evil. And they just use those to no end to attack the decent whites. Just like with the gun control thing. It's such a shame.
Very well said. We have a financial gift from the one and only Mrs. Jess Horse, produced enough children to field a baseball team. She financially gifts $20. God bless you. Thank you so much. And she writes with that $20, fantastic stream, and gives us 3 white heart emojis. I think it's one for each of us tonight. Thank you so much, Miss Jess Horse. We have 0022 financially gifting $3. Thank you, good brother. He writes, I'm glad you have recovered. You were sick before. Are you fully recovered? I am not quite there, but I'm definitely getting. I don't know if you saw on Sunday where I was trying to get a breath. It was getting tough there toward the end. Little bit of loss of consciousness, I think, but didn't do anything too weird, or at least weirder than normal. We have JK160 financially gifting $5. Thanks so much, brother. And he writes with those $5 for the three of us. Great show. Everybody get out your raucous emojis, because we have Dude Bro Moment, who is financially gifted $75. A $75 financial gift. Thank you so much, brother. He writes, love the show so far. Let's see. I can't even read that word. They're a Neuthoff fundraiser over the Ossetru Folk Assembly YouTube page. So this is over at the Ossetru Folk Assembly YouTube page, and it's a fundraiser. The funding for their Hoff got pulled last minute. Yes, I did hear about this. And the lender, because these people are white and they want to have their, it's not a church is what they don't call it a church, but it's a Hoff, I guess. He says, if you can help them, I'm sure they would appreciate it. There is a 5-minute, 28-second video that lays out the story. Thanks. And folks, so that would also, I guess, include that if you have knowledge about where they could go for lending, for alternative sources of lending, rather than just a financial gift to them. Alternative sources of lending would also be, I know we have people in every field. So I know there are going to be folks out there who work in with lenders and the like, banks, who can step up and maybe give them some information. Thank you so much, Dude Bro Moment. And I turn back around to here, and it looks like we have Alcat financially gifting $10. Thank you so much, brother. And he says, Hake rocks. Let's go. He does indeed. And thank you so very much for that. It responds for Alcat, James?
I appreciate it. And shout out to your other subscribers who've donated as well. I love the fact that people are having white babies. Much needed. It's a shame what's happening to our population. It's not good for anybody.
Oh, it's, yeah, absolutely. It's not good for anybody. We have the great Troll Slayer, which is what my new name for moderators now. Natarific with us. He does many things, but tonight he is also troll slaying, and but he does many things. A magnificent gentleman. Please, folks, round of raucous emojis at the $25 mark. Financial gift. Thanks so much, good brother. And he writes, "Let's go and join the OT." The OT, folks, if you don't know what that is the outreach team. And if you're interested, Natarific will provide more information in the live chat for you all. And there is also a White Wellbeing open chat that you can become a part of on Telegram if you are so interested. And essentially the outreach team organizes to reach out in efforts to get the concepts that we use into the mouths of colossally sized content creators. And by that, I'm not talking about like Whoopi Goldberg's many pounds. But thank you so much, Natarific, and all the hard work that you and everybody on the outreach team are doing. True champions in service to white well-being. And here we have Carrie financially gifting $5. Thank you so very much for that financial gift. And Carrie writes, love to all our people. Well, indeed. Thank you so much. Nothing but a bunch of love here. It's a love fest on tap. As we are getting ready to tap out, I will take a quick look over here on Entropy. Looks like we're good. And another refresh for Cash App in a moment. And while we wait for that to refresh, we're going to ask James to give us his final thoughts and to tell everybody where they can find him in his magnificent work. James, the floor is yours.
Well, once again, I appreciate it, everybody. Shout out to the people in chat. Hope the people who are my regulars are behaving themselves, which they tend to always do. Once again, to reiterate what you guys said and what I've said, that whites doing well and whites being honest and real is good for all races. And wish others well. Don't delight in their destruction. I noticed that when I was growing up, we weren't celebrating all this black on black crime, but you'll notice that many of the blacks who are into the black thing, some of them will call into my show and they're like gleeful at the like these black Hebrew Israelites, gleeful at the destruction of America and of the whites. Oh, you guys are going to be slaves. That's evil.
Yeah.
Why the attack on whites? Same reason as the attack on men, the attack on children. They're targeting the children because children can see through things, and their children are brutally honest, painful to the ego, and they want to get them young. So that's evil. And the same reason for the attack on Christians who've been so subverted. I was looking at your Odyssey chat. They were saying that Christianity is responsible for many anti-white movements, and all three Abrahamic religions are poison. And in many ways, I do see how that has been true. And I don't think that that's the real thing. We need to always be searching for real truth and look at ourselves. So I appreciate it, guys. TheHakeReport.com. Check it out. And I post my appearances, including on the afterparty.tv, on there as well, under my appearances section. And so as long as Squarespace doesn't drop me, then I'll be on thehakereport.com. Maybe I should look into alternative platforms. Unfortunately, a lot of white Americans are having to go outside of America to get some free speech. What a mess.
What a mess.
Well, if you want to talk about that off camera, I have some suggestions.
I appreciate it.
We're pretty well protected, as well as you can be, with our web presence. I always felt it was important to have an old school website, even though we live in this age of social media and most of us congregate around the social media platforms. Websites are really where you have more control. And if everything went down, if our Twitter was gone one day, at least you can get on the mailing list on our website and we can communicate with you through that. But
cool.
Speaking of which, we have the afterparty.tv. So when we can get this downloaded from YouTube, we'll have it there. We put it on a different kind of video hosting. It's not the YouTube embed when you watch it right on the site. Again, a little more secure. So when this is up, I'll give you the link. You're welcome to link to it from your hakereport.com site. But all of our shows are archived on the afterparty.tv. Going on, check this out, James. At the end of this month, 4 years. That's a lot for us. I know Jesse's been doing it for a lot longer.
Yeah, he's been at it 31 years.
Wow.
Going on. No, we're approaching within a week 32 years of bond. So that's his nonprofit, Rebuilding the Family by Rebuilding the Man, which is very needed. So that right on to you guys. I really applaud that. There's a lot of people. I think that this persecution is an opportunity to make us better. These challenges. Right on to you guys. That's cool.
It's a bottleneck. It's a bottleneck, and we always leave people with that message. It's very, very, very easy to get down when you scroll your Twitter feed and you see bad news, bad news, bad news. First of all, it's not to take away from all the pain and suffering that is happening or lessen it, but I do want to remind people that real life outside your door usually isn't quite as crazy as what you're seeing on social media. I mean, depending, maybe some of you are dealing with some tough stuff, and I don't want to make too many assumptions, but sometimes I have to step back and realize a lot of what I see on Twitter actually doesn't track with my lived experience, and you have to keep that in mind. But we are living through a time of transition, and that's a time where you either get overwhelmed by it or you say, all right, this is the time in history I was born into, and there's something I can contribute to this.
Yeah.
To get through this bottleneck and get through something that at the other end of that is healthier, better, more balanced, like we've been speaking about tonight. But that's cool. We're both associated with projects that have birthdays in February. So at the end of this month, we celebrate 4 years of the After Party. Jason and I started streaming together, and we have everything archived on the afterparty.tv. Go there, type in the search, guest name, topics. Everything is pretty well hashtagged. On a site, it's not hashtagged. It's really, they call it tags. Yeah. What the hell? They're called tags. So good enough. So if you want to go check out, if you're new here and want to check out what we've done, they're on Jason's channel, No White Guilt on YouTube, but they're also that site, the afterparty.tv. definitely want to say, give a warm welcome to anyone who might be tuning in for the first time tonight because of James coming over. Knowing James and seeing he was on this show, we appreciate you coming over, and we hope you got a little bit of a taste of what we're about. We'd love to see more, hear from you, do more crossover with James and his people. So yeah, James, it was great to speak to you. It's a real pleasure and an honor. And my own site is thegreatorder.com. More music in the works. I'll let you know about that when the time comes, but definitely a lot of things in the pipeline. Other than that, I give it to my friend Jason to take us out.
Well, what a magnificent time we've had tonight with James. And we've shared some sensitive language, a little bit of sensitive language. And we know that the ear is against the door. The ear is against the door always with the anti-whites. So we do want to say that when we shared some of that language, we were sharing the language that others use, not language that we normally use. Language like rooftop Koreans or illegal aliens. No people are illegal, and we view all people as individuals, not as representative of all good or all evil for any group of people. Maybe all good. Maybe they're just all good. Who knows? Except for me, who has a flag of himself on the wall, drinking coffee.
But who did someone send you that? Someone a chat, a long time listener, first time caller?
No, I know. I made them myself.
Really?
Big oil painting, yes. Big oil painting is coming next for my headboard.
Well, I know there's a lot of people in the chat have this inside joke about every time you take a sip of coffee. So I thought maybe it was a further development of that Jason sipping coffee motif.
So we'll just do one of these poses.
Yeah, James, some people like to cut out just that few seconds of a broadcast and then see how long the sip takes before he starts speaking. So this was kind of a thing with some people out there. So I don't know if maybe one of those people that is interested in your coffee usage, coffee sippage, printed that for you. It kind of looks like a flag. It is
a
flag. Yeah,
it is a flag. On PWR today, it worked out perfectly. Somebody asked a question about should all of the different groups, the right-wing groups, come together? And Mark said no, and Events of Red Elephants said no, he didn't think so either. And I went to Avatar, and I said, well, I think we should all come together under a single banner. And then I turned the video camera back on, and the flag was magically up on the wall at that point. So it worked out perfectly. But so did tonight's tap, because James is
live streaming history.
Yeah, that's right. But James, we would absolutely love to have you back. It was really glorious. You were fantastic. And of course, both Jared and I would like to appear with you whenever you would have us, because you do have a lovely audience, and I've watched many of your programs, and you got a lot of good people over there, and you've engendered a real community. And there's, as I say, you've become like a force on the internet. I'll take a quick look again to make sure I didn't miss anybody, because I hate missing questions or comments with financial gifts attached to them. Okay, so it looks like we're good, folks. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who financially gifted tonight, everybody who participated in the live stream. A big hello and thank you to everybody who just wanted to be a wallflower and see how magnificent we are here on the after party. Feel free to speak up whenever you would like. Of course, a big thank you to Naterific as well for troll slaying over the course of the gathering, a job that is so very important today when we have the ear against the door, and we are getting censored, as James pointed out, everywhere we turn. But a glorious time all together. Had a lot of great conversation with James, and looking forward in the future with another appearance. And Jared George and I will be back next week for another one of these